Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Great to see many of your familiar faces as well as new ones. Normally, I would be standing on stage emceeing the event, but it's good for a change that I get to sit down and chat to some of the greatest minds on transition planning, transition finance, to really deep dive on what is really happening on the ground when it comes to supporting net zero transition. In the interest of time, I don't need to introduce the speakers anymore. You can get their bios from our agenda, from the website. But if I may, just take a step back. Take a step back to 2022. Many of you, particularly banks in the room, have received a circular from HKMA, Hong Kong Monetary Authority, that talk about its 2-year plan to integrate climate risks into banking supervisory process. One of the initiatives under the 2-year plan is to review the greenness assessment framework to better understand and compare measures taken by banks in managing climate risks, as well as to explore a wider scope such as transition considerations. So now in 2024, as we are in the end of the 2-year plan, in light of the 6 high-level principles for transition planning issued by HKMA, which reference various frameworks, including GFANs, let's really pick the transition brains here across various segments of the sustainable finance ecosystem from public sector and private sector to really get the latest download of how transition planning is working. And so maybe I'll just start with Elaine first. As a regulator on stage with us, and earlier I mentioned about HKMA, I'm sure to supplement what HKMA is doing with transition planning on the banking sector, it would be great if you can just elaborate with us a little bit of how transition planning is also taking place on the policy front. How is it impacting listed companies and investors?
Thank you very much, Chaoni, and thank you, Hong Kong GFA, for inviting me to speak. I'm Elaine from the Hong Kong Securities and Futures Commission, so the other regulator, one of the other regulators in Hong Kong, and we look after listed companies and intermediaries, including asset managers. So I'm in a sustainable finance team, and we are a rather small team, but we've been quite ambitious in our work. And to the point about transition plans, maybe I'd like to take a little step back to talk a little bit about why this is important for us and what was the consideration behind the work that we've been putting in at the SFC. So this morning, we've already heard Financial Secretary Paul Chan talk about the strategic position of Hong Kong, and how it could really be very effective as a transition hub, right? Because it's also an international finance center. And from a policy perspective, what an international finance center means to us would be really that we need to recognize that our capital, the capital that we service in Hong Kong, has an international base, which means that it comes with expectations and it comes with requirements that these capital providers also need to provide to their stakeholders and to their own regulators, right? And for Hong Kong as an international finance center, it is absolutely essential for Hong Kong to uphold international standards, because this is why we are able to intermediate this capital so effectively and efficiently. So from our side, we fully intend for Hong Kong to uphold these international standards, which includes the adoption of the ISSB standards that Emmanuel was talking about this morning. Right. The ISSB is established to form a global baseline, and the multiple regulators that have supported the ISSB are also steering and encouraging efforts for ISSB to achieve the sort of interoperability between jurisdictions, so including that with the US and that with ESRS in the EU. So if Hong Kong adopts the ISSB, we can leverage on this international effort for interoperability. And the reason why we know this and the reason why we are fully supportive of this is because over the last 5 years, the SFC has been very much involved at the IOSCO level, steering the work and collaborating with other like-minded regulators to move this forward. And we will continue to do this so that we can get that cohesive ecosystem going. And Paul Chan also mentioned this morning that Hong Kong being a manufacturing hub, we also account for more than 50% of the world's emissions, which means that if there's any action on transition, it's going to have a very tangible impact to the economy. Mary Shapiro also mentioned that we need to get money to where the emissions are, and this is exactly what we intend to achieve, right? To be able to have that framework so that companies in Asia and the financiers in Asia can connect on that same platform, the same framework, the same language, so that they can understand each other, so that the transition story in Asia can be communicated. So what are we doing about that, right? Disclosures, I want to say here, right at the start, and put it out there, is just the tool. It is not the end game, right? The end game is actual business activities and a real economy. But that needs to be accompanied by finance. And how do we encourage that? So we put out the requirements for corporate disclosure. We want to link the dots so that companies are disclosing information that investors want, that the financiers can come together and then provide that finance. So the ISSB is one way of doing it. We are working with other regulators, including the Hong Kong Exchange. We are taking a phased approach. So the Hong Kong Exchange has already put out its rules, which are climate-specific and very, very close to the ISSB S2, IFRS S2. And over time, because of our firm commitment to adopt the ISSB, it will move towards the actual ISSB standards. And this gives companies and investors enough time to get used to the sort of information that will be communicated in that pathway. And then on this note, we also heard from Emmanuel that the ISSB has taken on the materials from the UK Transition Plan Task Force, which has worked very closely with GFANZ on transition plan guidance. So over time, this is going to be worked into the requirements as either educational materials or actual guidance for companies. And we will work with local partners to make this relevant and useful for the companies in Hong Kong and the users of that information in Hong Kong. Because transition is very location specific. So we want to be able to then properly articulate the needs for Asia, right? Because getting money to the emissions is actually a big hurdle because everybody wants to finance green stuff. And then the brown stuff actually gets a little bit left behind and difficult to fully convince investors to put the finance where there is. Also, there is the risk of transition washing as well. So I'll just stop here. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Elaine. I think it's good that you put it out there, that disclosure, in alignment to ISSB, is a tool, right, to enable companies, real economy, to seek transition capital from the market. So don't look at it as a compliance requirement only. Look at the end game. So thanks for reinforcing that view. Maybe I'll just move to Secretary Liu. Liu 秘书长您好，谢谢您。
Mr. Liu, thank you very much for joining this annual forum from afar. I would like to ask, Huzhou in China is the earliest city starting transitional finance. Can you introduce to us in relation to transitional finance, what is the approach of Huzhou and what are the achievements? I think there are a lot of things that Hong Kong and other financial cities can learn from or take reference from. Okay, thank you, moderator. First of all, thank you very much. I'm happy to represent Huzhou to join the Hong Kong GFA annual forum. I don't know whether you know about Huzhou. Huzhou is in Zhejiang province. It has Green Mountain. It is the source of Silver Mountains, Gold Mountains. And Huzhou is within the first batch of green finance reform pilot areas in China since 2022 in PBOC and other central authorities. and also under the leadership of Dr. Ma Jun, Huzhou had done some exploration about transition finance. And in today's meeting, many times you heard this term transition finance and how it should be done, what difficulties and problems had been faced. Actually, Huzhou had done some advanced exploration. We have achieved some progress. I'm happy to share these main points with you. So, what can transition finance achieve? When we started our work in transition finance, it is within the 5 major pillars stated. So for these 5 pillars, what have we done? In relation to transition standards, we're the first in our country to formulate a catalog on transaction finance and also the planning guidelines to help the financial institutions to identify transition. Number 2, in terms of information disclosure, we have promoted certain enterprises to explore and try the use of ISSB sustainability disclosure standards. Huzhou Bank and also Anji Agricultural Commercial Bank, these 2 financial institutions have already joined ISSB as a new partner. And then in relation to product and services, we encourage financial institutions to innovate on transition finance products. So far, there have been 30 innovative products and services launched. Number 4, in relation to policy formulation, the government gives some loan subsidy or other financial subsidy to these transition companies. And then in relation to public notary transition, we have also incorporated it into the whole process of credit business. These are the 5 areas. Now, I would like to share with you about 2 fundamental work or initiatives. First is to formulate transition finance standard. For this standard, it is not a nationwide standard. It is our own standard in Huzhou.
So how do we go about it? Well, for Huzhou, at present, there are 8 types of important high-tech technology or industry that would include fibers, construction materials, etc. So 8 areas. And with these 8 areas, we are coming up with a classification and a list of transition activities for these 8 areas. For these 8 industries and areas, we have 106 technology that can be adopted. These 106 technology paths, we call them, these financial institutions will recognize them if they are adopted, that the company or the enterprise is going through or adopting transition. So the companies, while they are formulating their plans for transition, they have a lot of challenges. And one of the things that they have to do is to adopt some solutions in face of these challenges. For example, in setting the target for transition, how to implement the transition plan, some of the safeguards, for example, for disclosure and implementation of plans, etc. And so, step by step, following the guidelines, this can be done. So we are helping these enterprises to come up with these plans. And another would be, very importantly, the financial institutions, are they able to support this transition? We think that this is very important. It is a catalyst, and it can come from the financial institutions or the government departments. And in Huzhou, we have a subsidy plan for transition loans. So for the enterprises going through transition, they want to reduce however much carbon emission, then in their 0.5% of their annual loan amount, we give them a subsidy or a waiver so as to lower their financing need. And also, it can go up to 10%, this subsidy quota. So with 0.5% or a higher percent, it would help with the transition process of these enterprises. Let me give you some data. In Huzhou, we have cumulatively already announced 194 such items or programs of support and subsidy. And also, there are over 20 major companies in the major industries which have been put into this transition plan. And we have a list of these transition finances and also some of the routes that the enterprises can take. In a sense, we are coming up with something new to support these enterprises which had been high in carbon emission. And with this, there will be further support for these companies in terms of finances. And right now, Huzhou cumulatively has already 10 billion RMB, which had been put into this particular program, made available for the enterprises. Actually, the enterprises welcome this very much. The banks participating also welcome this plan, as well as the government, of course. Well, this is a wonderful example from Huzhou. You can see
policy and financing to support low carbon transition within the hard to abate high impact sectors, right? And you know, you have heard from Secretary Liu through the design of local transition taxonomy, through disclosure requirement, as well as, you know, supporting corporates, real economy corporates, you know, to transition in their transition planning. And very importantly is the tax incentive and interest rate incentive to really move the needle or catalyst, you know, the market capital flow. So definitely a lot for us to take away with. And just a side note for those who is not familiar with Huzhou, this is where they filmed Crunching Tiger and Hidden Dragon. So I thought I would let you guys know. Anyway, let me go back to the panel here. Maybe I could, you know, zoom into the banks. We have HSBC and Bank of China here. And so it would be really good to understand how you are developing your own transition planning, including support your clients with their transition journey. Maybe I'll just start with Justin. How do you tackle these, you know, big challenges?
Thanks, Chaoni. And thanks for the Hong Kong Green Finance Association for the opportunity. Very good question. Let's talk about transition plans, and I think it's a pretty powerful picture you painted with Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. So I'll try to see if I can do something similar with painting a picture. Look, I mean, I think it's not too complicated. I hope to understand what actually a transition plan is, right? We published ours at the beginning of January this year. In some ways, you know, we talked about in our climate commitments that we need to engage our clients on their transition plans. So if you're asking, you know, clients to have their transition plans, to develop one, in some ways you need to have your own as well, right? And I think probably all the banks here would you know, share a similar position on this. You know, when you make climate commitments, right? When we made our targets, as Luann pointed out, back in 2020. You know, we set our ambition to become a net zero bank, even through our finance emissions by 2050. You really need an action plan of how to get there, and that's essentially what a transition plan is. So let's break it down, right? How do we get to net zero by 2050? Well, I think it needs to, one thing is we need to understand how a transition to a low carbon economy actually works, right? And it could happen in sort of two stages. The first stage is what you do in the near term, the kind of actions we have to accelerate immediately before the end of this decade. There's a lot of numbers out there, but you know, one study that we cited in our report, I think it's from a McKinsey study actually, but you know, we need essentially about $39 trillion of investment into transition by the end of this decade, right? And we're halfway through this decade already, and half of that number needs to be here in Asia. And then we need another 116 or so trillion from 2030 into 2050, right, for the next stage. But really, it's a two-stage plan or two-stage transition. In the first stage, we need to deploy as much of the transition technologies, the commercially viable transition technologies we have today, as quickly and as quickly as possible. So one example of that is earlier this year we facilitated an investment by a Chinese utility company to build a transmission line in Latin America. In fact, became the longest transmission line in Latin America. It was in Chile. About 1,200 kilometers. And the purpose was actually to deliver the solar power that was being built in the north of the country to the demand centers in the middle of the country, right? And this is an example of clean infrastructure that we actually need to deploy a lot of. We heard about, I think we're all familiar with the need to scale up renewable energy and the impressive gains that China and other countries in the region have made. But actually, without grids, you can't really actually deliver that power, that clean power, those clean electrons. So this is an example of clean infrastructure we have to deploy today. And the second example is the second stage, right? Because all the technologies that we don't have all the technologies yet to achieve net zero by 2050. Some of these technologies are probably technically feasible, but not yet commercially viable. So one example is sustainable aviation fuels. Which is something that we obviously need at some point, because we can only go so far with more efficient planes, good ground operations, airlines, good passenger behavior, things like that. At some point, we need to make that leap into sustainable aviation fuels, and that's a technology that's not yet commercially viable. And one thing we're doing with emerging climate tech is trying to support some of these new companies and trying to partner with venture funds and others to deploy and scale some of these technologies that's still in sort of early stage, and that's really what we need in the second part. So I think with any transition plan, it's important to paint that picture and to break it down into these steps, and then we can sort of do the action, right? Know what we need to press the accelerator on, know what we need to prepare for the next stage, and know what we need to do to essentially complete the journey.
Thanks a lot, Justin. Just a reminder to the audience that please send through your questions through the QR code. I will be monitoring the screen, and if time allows, I really hope to answer some of the questions from you. Okay, maybe can we ask Fei here to also coming to just share with us Bank of China Hong Kong's approach when it comes to transition planning, and how do you assess your clients their transition readiness and preparedness, and therefore gear your balance sheet and the market to support them.
Oh, thanks, Chaoni, and thanks HKGFA for having me today. I'm Fei from Bank of China Hong Kong. So apart from what Justin has shared about the target setting and pathway setting, we are doing. I want to share our approach in like 3 key points. As our CEO just said, sustainability is essential value to us. So from this tone of the talk, we actually developed a very thorough transition planning. But the first key point I want to share is about portfolio management. So alongside with all the pathway and other things, we try to segregate our portfolio into 4 different, in terms of climate perspective. Some are very brown, some are transitioning, some are ordinary, and some are green. The target, or how we are going to do the transition, is that if we can actually limit the brown part, the highly sensitive part, and then we are enlarging the green part, then we are eventually having a much greener portfolio from time to time. So for the brown part, we actually introduced high sensitive sector strategy statements to detailing how we are limiting the certain type of business we are doing with them. We also set up a ratio ceiling for our corporate loans so that they cannot exceed a certain level from the brown sector. But by that, we are giving them a way out. If those customers in the high sensitive sectors or industry, they are demonstrating themselves having some level of transition activities. We can classify them as a transiting companies and carve out from that ratio ceiling. And on the other side of our portfolio, we are having another KPI for the green, the ratio of green loans, green and sustainability loans, and we are having it larger and larger every year. So by then, we are actually doing a portfolio management for limiting the brown sector and enlarging the green sector. But the successful of this portfolio management depends on one very key factor that Justin just mentioned. It's about client engagement. So only if our client is actually engaged and motivated to do their transition, our own business can be survive, maintain the same, or even grow larger during the transition plan. And we understand that everyone knows about ESG, everyone can be motivated, but there are a lot of obstacles they're facing. So that we have to do product and service innovations that are pinpointing their pain points and also articulating their specific needs for their own transition needs, for their own transition plans, so that we can actually engage them to do the transition. For example, we actually utilize the tools for sustainability linked loans in various sectors, including hotels, shipping, pumping, shipping, I mentioned shipping already, property sector, and other sectors, so that we can have very specific, industry-specific SPT for them to actually lead them through the transition planning. Also, we actually, for example, another example is that we extend our green personal loan for the usage of enrolling to the sustainable finance courses that are recognized by the government, so that we can actually help the individuals for capacity buildings on that frame as well, so that we actually do the product innovation and service innovation to articulate the specific needs. And last but not least, the third component I want to share is about policies and standards. They may sound very tedious, but every detail matters. For example, do we actually have the right financial incentive for our customers and our frontline to go for sustainability, sustainable finance, so that they are just willingly, eagerly to do that instead of we have to push them? Do we have the right risk management assessment on them? And as one mentioned, we are doing a portfolio management. Do we have the right standard on what is green or what is transition? And how are we going to deal with regional difference on them? So this kind of policy and standards we are currently and continuously developing, so that to articulate every detail that we met during what we are trying to engage with the customer. So together, we will try to become the transition partner of every of our customers, so that we can all go together to lead to the transition for the whole society. And this is largely what we are doing for the BOC Hong Kong.
Thanks a lot, Fei. Actually, I might just go back to Justin and you, listening to how you describe, the work that you're undertaking with your clients, right? What's the general reaction from your customers in some of these hardware-based sectors as you discuss with them about their transition planning to help you to deliver your transition planning? Do they feel there's enough carrots and sticks for them to actually make the change?
It's always better to have more. For us, carrot and stick, so that actually this is actually what our CEO just said. 2 points: incentive and discipline. So if you have more incentive programs, they are doing it faster, more motivated. If there are more discipline, more regulatory policy in place, they have to do it anyway, so that it will in both ways, or at least if they have to regulate policies, there will be much less internal argument for whether to go for transitions. So these are actually better for everyone to go for the transitions. Carrot and stick, both, yes.
Justin?
Look, I think everybody has there's a common baseline to say that we need to achieve net zero, right? I mean, this is almost every jurisdiction in the world has some sort of goal or target in place. And I think in some ways, it really depends on how you position it, right? I think when we talk to our clients, we say a transition plan is not something you do on the side. It is going to be your business plan for the next 5 or 10 years. And I think if you frame it in those terms, it becomes a real conversation about, okay, what do we need to stay competitive? What do we need to invest in? What is our business plan? And that's going to be part of your transition plan.
Great, thank you very much for the additional color. Elaine?
Yeah, I just wanted to add my 2 cents to that as well. And I think also both Justin and Fei had mentioned a lot around projects, solutions, actual activity. So there is, that's happening, but there's also the transition of the whole firm, right? So from the disclosure perspective, and the panelists also alluded to that, what is your strategy, your business strategy to transition, right? And it will be the action steps that you're taking, the specific activities. Those can be supported by taxonomies, it could be supported by finance products. But over time, when the international investors are buying into your stock, for example, the asset owners themselves, they are looking at the whole company, the whole firm. How are you moving towards towards a new, I guess, a reality of a low carbon economy? Are you able to take advantage of that? So that goes to the long-term value creation of a firm. So I think this is the two layers that we also need to be very clear about.
And I just realized that I think us together in combination, we are the carrots and sticks. Jeffrey.
We're the carrots, right?
Jeffrey, last but not least, reflecting what they just described, right, what they just shared, can you just, from your perspective, from Moody's, based on Moody's, observation, methodology, what does a good transition, look like? And yeah, so it'd be good if you can just share a little bit.
Yeah, so hi, nice to see you all, and it's a pleasure to be invited, and thank you for Hong Kong Green Finance Association to giving this opportunity. At Moody's, as a rating agency, our mission is to really provide a transparent third-party opinions around sustainability financing frameworks as well as an entity's decarbonization plans. So again, I think it's very important. I do agree with all the panelists' statements. And if we put some numbers around it, I think in APAC, if you look at the sustainable debt financing market, has grown significantly, almost tripled in the past 5 years. The penetration has been increased from below 4% to towards 12, 13% last year. But we have seen some slowing down of that number coming down this year. And when I speak to my issuers and entities, it's really about, okay, we don't have sufficient green assets. We have lots of transition assets, but we don't have sufficient green assets. So we're going to save this green assets until the rainy days come so that I can use it for my marketing purposes and et cetera. So transition obviously is the most important topic, and I do want to reiterate the fact that the two-layer approach as well as the importance of the transition pathway at the entity level. Because at the end of the day, green bonds, sustainability bonds, thematic transition bonds, or SLBs, these are all financing tools that an entity should use for a transition pathway or decarbonization pathway. So that is really to support that. And then the greenwashing, transition washing comes in. Investors are questioning, lenders are questioning about the credibility of the transition pathway. So at Moody's, we do provide opinion on entities' decarbonization pathway, but we have expanded our methodology in a way beyond ambition setting or target setting. So when we look at companies' ambition, obviously we look at all scope 1, 2, 3. We break it down into short-term, long-term. In the short term, we put more emphasis on scope 1 and 2 because those are controllable scope emissions where they have more immediate kind of solutions to reduce that emission. For long term, we put emphasis on scope 3 emissions because that's the ultimate goal of most of the hard-to-abate sectors. Ambition setting should be based on science-based targets. We at Moody's, we use IEA's 3 scenarios in order to calculate whether the company is 1.5 aligned or well below 2. So we actually go from 1.5 all the way to 2.5 because we want to provide as much information as possible, granular information to investors and lenders and let them decide what they want to finance, whether it's net zero scenarios or well below 2 scenarios. because at the portfolio level, at the end of the day, you're not going to have all your borrowers and your investee companies at 1.5, but you'll be mixing up some at 1.5, some at well below 2 in order to get to reduce your finance emissions. So ambitions and target setting, we have been discussing that a lot. But I think, as Fei mentioned, it's very important that we discuss about implementation strategy, because that has been something that not has been taken too much of a debate in the past years. So in our assessment, we actually notch the ambitions down as we look at the implementation strategy in the short and long term, and how you address scope 1, 2, 3. So for example, we worked with a French utilities company, EDF, in the past few months in order to assess their decarbonization plan, where we rated that pathway at net zero assessment. I can always stop. Yeah, net zero score of 2, which is the second highest, despite the fact that their ambition level was aligned with 1.5 degree scenario. We thought that the implementation strategy, especially for the long-term scope 3, was not as satisfactory, where we took a negative notch down, and ultimately we view that the scenarios will be well below 2 because of still the unclarity around addressing the scope 3 emissions. And that was mainly because they still rely on, they are heavily investing in renewables and nuclear in the short term, which will solve a lot of scope 1 and 2 in the short term, as well as in the long term, scope 1 and 2. They're decommissioning and divesting their gas power generation factories and such, so that's all going to help. But at the same time, to meet the national demand of electricity, they're importing gas and selling gas, basically, which really depends on the overall demand. But at the same time, it depends on the commercial viability of some of the technologies like green hydrogen or biomethane and etc. So that there is some unclarity around scope 3 emissions, as well as the next generation nuclear power plants, as well as replacing the existing power plants with a safer version of it. So we have put a lot of emphasis on looking at the implementation strategy, and we have over 50 sustainable finance analysts actually engaging with the companies in order to help investors and lenders to have more granular information and that engagement information with the issuers. And the last layer of our assessment when we look at the decarbonization plan is actually governance around the implementation strategy. So we look at the carbon accounting, what kind of scope is included, does it cover all the scope of scope 3 emissions or not, as well as we look at board level coherence to the overarching sustainability strategy. So whether, does board have that specialty in looking at sustainability strategy? Is their numerations actually linked to KPIs that is in relation to sustainability strategy, so on and so forth. So it's a very overarching strategy where we're trying to reduce that transition washing concerns. And we really hope that this can actually help to boost up the issuance of transition label bonds as well as SLBs. We all know that SLB market has been very, very weak, especially in this region, as well as the takeoff of transition bonds have been very slow. So we do hope that this decarbonization plan kind of assessment can actually support and supplement that issuance trends.
Great. Thank you so much, Jeffrey. I think it's good to understand, the more science-based approach, right, to assess transition plan, transition action. And I think, from the capital markets, there's a lot of willingness, but certainly banks here want to deploy the capital towards credible transition. So I think this is helpful to have that kind of tool out there. Before I turn to the last round of questions to the panelists, just want to encourage audience here to submit your questions through the QR code. More than happy to address some of the burning questions that you might have as we go through the last 10 minutes of the discussion. You know, we heard how great it is, you know, how important it is. Maybe we can also talk about the pain points and what are the next steps, you know, that we could expect, you know, from you guys in the ecosystem. Elaine?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that we've heard a lot around, you know, the need to collaborate. So one of the pain points that I think also is shared by many of you in the room is that if the ESG team is very small, the sustainability team is very small, a lot of times actually you're gathering support. You need a lot of buy-in, you need to do a lot of selling, both internally and externally. I have to do that as well. So with my colleagues internally, with other regulators, we need to convince each other that we need to work together, right? It's not always about doing just your own thing because the whole transition is connected. And Hong Kong is also connected to every single jurisdiction here in Asia because our supply chain and the value chain is so broad. So how do we as Hong Kong be able to support, stimulate, motivate, you know, and then connect with some of these other economies as well and get them to support us? So I think this is an area where we've been working quite closely with our counterparts across the region for that.
Justin?
Yeah, I think. Well, look, maybe a more of general comment, right? I think one of the challenges is that this topic has quickly become very big and very mainstream. Right, because you know, just a few years ago, we didn't really have net zero targets. We had a lot of investment into transition and clean technologies for a very long time. The sustainable finance market also, developed about 10 years ago and started emerging. But only very recently, I think this became a very mainstream topic and started, you know, encompassing the whole sort of economy, right? And this is why I think we need to start looking at transition planning across not just some of the, some of the companies or institutions that are kind of at the front of the transition, but even those that are just starting now, right? So I think that's probably one of these challenges that's emerging, is that how does it apply across a wider group of actors, and how do we all understand everything and set the standards, right? And I think this is why I think there's been a lot of discussion about taxonomies, which is trying to harmonize this, transition planning, which is trying to just understand how you get from A to B, and then transition finance, which is just to give clear investment signals to, you know, where we should put our money and investment and deploy our financing.
Thank you. Fei?
One of the pain points, actually, similar to what Justin just said, is about the pathway setting, about the transition. It also answers part of the questions from the audience. So when we are trying to assess the credibility of the transition planning, we always have to think about whether it's aligned with the 1.5 degree scenario or 2 degree scenarios. But actually what we have facing in Hong Kong right now or in China right now is that when we are trying to assess the pathway, we can't find a very good pathway to use, because most of the pathway are set in the developed world is not really is targeted in 2050, but many of the Asia countries, actually their NDCs are talking about 2060 or 2070. So how are we aligning the local differences with the global standard? And do we need an Asian pathway? This is the question we always ask. Because Asia, we are a developing economy. Many sectors are actually growing. Somehow, the carbon emission is actually have to go up with the growth of economy, and then this gradually go down. So how are we going to address this? So this is the questions or pain points that we always have. How can we assess the Asia-specific transition planning to such that they are actually very credible? Or we have to use the international standard, to use the one-size-fits-all rulers to measure about the Asian companies. If that's the case, many of the cases in Asia it's very hard to be considered as transition. This is something we have to think about it. And we believe only by collaboration, as what Elaine just said, not just by banks, also by the companies, by the regulators, and also the society or the market as a whole, we can answer the questions, co-creating what we need in Asia to assess and push forward for a credible transition.
Thank you. And Jeffrey?
Yeah, I really echo what Fei just said, is that one of the difficulties of service providers like us, whether it's us or SBTI or many other ESG service providers, is that in Asia in particular, when I speak to the entities, the difficulties is that we don't have a regionalized pathway for specific sectors. For if it's real estate, we have CRAM pathways, for example. But do we have regionalized pathways? Yes, but not much in detail. So if you're a real estate developer or REITs company who's running your portfolios over different countries, different sectors, data centers, commercial buildings, residential buildings, how am I going to create that pathway? So I think for us, all the stakeholders in the market of sustainable finance, we do need to probably really work together in creating Asia-specific, sector-specific kind of pathways in order to successfully support that transition finance.
Thank you. Liu 秘书长,
Mr. Liu, can you spend 1 minute to share with us in transition finance? What is further room for further transition in Huzhou? Okay, thank you. I believe that in relation to today's topic, in the future we have to go from planning to implementation. That is a feasible pathway. As said just now, if we want pathway, we need government departments, financial institutions, and corporates to work together. 3 things have to be done. The key word is credibility. We have to formulate credible transition plans. As we know, the industry doesn't know how to make a transition plan and what is the right pathway. So for government departments, financial institutions, our industrial organizations, we need to tell the industry what measures they should take in order to achieve transition. We know that companies want to transition as well. Mainland companies, well, they are affected by CBAM. If they don't do footprint transition, if they don't do transition, then there would be problems to their survival and to their sales. So we need to make credible plans. Second, we need to judge whether or not a company's transition plan is credible. We know that financial institutions are worried that when they extend loans, that may lead to some problems for the enterprises. These companies want to get loans, and as a result, they put in place some non-science-based plans and rules. And as a result, financial institutions are in fact giving support to high carbon companies. So that is the wrong thing. We want to make sure that we have to put in capital to sustainable areas. And as a result, financial institutions, people have to be enhanced in capacity. Number 3, we need to evaluate whether the result of a company's transition is credible. Now, companies will put in place transition plan, financial institutions extend transition loans or funds. But at the end of the day, what is the result of the company's transition? We have to evaluate. In Huzhou, we are going to launch a accounting platform of companies. So for 80% of companies in Huzhou, we're going to do carbon audit. In other words, in a certain quarter, how much is a company's carbon intensity, how much is its carbon emission, we can do an evaluation. But this has to be done by the government. Well, I think if Huzhou can do it, many other places can also do it. Financial institutions in Hong Kong can also take a look at your own customers, key customers, and help them in carbon audit, because you are extending out transition finance. The cost of fund is lower. And, well, of course, we are not going to do carbon audit on all customers. Within your loan customers, you can focus on high carbon customers, identify them, and help them make transition plans. And then you need to differentiate whether those plans are credible, and then do an evaluation. So from easy to difficult, from focus to general. So in that way, we are able to go from planning to implementation, and then we can have credible transition pathways. Thank you.
What we can do next. I know our time is up. I've been signaled to end the panel discussion. But I don't think I can walk out here alive if I don't pick one question from the Q&A here. So and I combine a couple of questions together that many have shared us, transition planning is one thing, but what about transition action? And when it comes to transition action, how do we also manage the difference of expectations between transition in Asia, for example, versus transition in more developed, markets? Any taker here?
Yeah, I think just going back to our approach is that it's really just to really balance between the ambition and the implementation plan. Like, for example, I think the ambitions in the developed markets could be more easily reaching 1.5, whereby because of many limitations in this region, our starting point might be well below 2. But at the end of the day, as a lender and investor, when we are trying to allocate more capital into this region, is that if we have a strong implementation plan with well below 2, it will be as good as having 1.5 with a weaker implementation plan. So in fact, from a assessment point of view from service providers like us, that we can actually have a very strong overall decarbonization plan with ambition implementation combined to have more capital flowing into this region. If we have a very strong pathways that we can actually build for Asia Pacific.
Justin.
I'm going to shamelessly steal a quote from a former colleague of mine who I think said this at a conference recently. He quoted Usain Bolt, who some of you might know was a Jamaican sprinter about 14, 15 years ago, and broke some world records, I think, at the Beijing Olympics. So he said, in terms of sprinting, I'm not a very good starter, but I'm a strong finisher.
Love that.
Just leave it at that.
Elaine.
I just want to weigh in on that, because having different speeds of transition, or like in Asia, multiple economies have different climate ambitions with 2060, 2065, 2070. So in our international discussions, we've also been communicating this, and I think in our sort of engagement with both regulators and the investor community, I think this is where credibility of the transition plan is even more important, right? Because your pathway is a little bit elongated, but lengthened, but it doesn't mean you cannot take those concrete steps at this point. And the articulation of that, how does it connect with your governance and your management of your transition risk and your climate risk is even more important to ensure. So this is a call out to all corporates out there that you should get on with your transition plan disclosure, your transition planning, and disclose them properly so that the financiers, the investors can use that information.
Thank you.
Okay, one last word. A very harmonized interoperable taxonomy is actually the ultimate answer for that. And that's why we need more collaborations from the market and all stakeholders to actually harmonize all the differences.
Thank you very much. I don't think I can get out of this room alive anyway because I take out time from our organizer. But in closing, we have heard, from our wonderful speakers that a credible climate transition plan is a time-bound action plan that requires you to pivot, your assets, your business, your operations towards, science-based, Paris-aligned endgame. So with that, I want to thank my speakers as well as, the audience here and online for a very engaging session. Thank you very much.